The air in the house felt thick that evening, like something invisible was weighing it down. Dinner was unusually quiet, save for the clinking of forks against plates and the occasional sigh from my mother-in-law. The tension had been building for days, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something snapped. As I served the last dish at the dinner table, I felt my mother-in-law's eyes on me. I could sense her impatience, her simmering discontent just waiting to bubble over. She had never been subtle about her disdain for me, and tonight would be no different. "The reason we're in such a mess financially is because someone here doesn't work," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. Her words were aimed squarely at me, even though she didn't say my name. I could feel Jem's eyes on me. He was sitting next to me, his fork frozen mid-air, as he glanced between his mother and me. My father-in-law shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but he stayed quiet, just like he always did when she went off. "Mom, don't," Jem said softly, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He was tired of these arguments, as tired as I was of hearing them, but his mother ignored him. "It's true," she said, louder this time. "We're sinking because we have an extra person in this house who contributes nothing. You're not employed, Sherry, and being a housewife isn't a real job, is it?" Her words stung, but they weren't new. This had become her mantra over the past few months, ever since Jem and I had moved in with his parents after he lost his job. She never missed an opportunity to remind me of my supposed worthlessness. I clenched my fork a little tighter, but I didn't respond. I had learned that arguing with her was pointless. No matter what I said, she always found a way to twist it, to make me the villain in her story. Jem sighed heavily beside me, clearly struggling to find the right words to diffuse the situation. But before he could say anything, his mother's voice pierced the room again. "I've said it before, and I'll say it again," she continued, her tone sharpening. "This house would be better off without you." The silence that followed was deafening. Jem looked stunned, his face pale and his mouth slightly open. My father-in-law dropped his fork, the clatter breaking the stillness in the room. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. I felt the weight of her words pressing down on me, but instead of anger or sadness, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Maybe it was because I had heard these words so many times before, or maybe it was because I had finally reached my limit. Whatever the reason, I knew something inside me had shifted. "I'll leave," I said softly but clearly, pushing my chair back from the table. My voice was steady, calm. Too calm, maybe. My mother-in-law blinked in surprise, her expression caught between satisfaction and shock. "What?" "I'll leave," I repeated, standing up from the table. "You've made it clear that I'm not welcome here, so I'll go." Jem's hand shot out to grab mine. "Sherry, no, you don't have to." But I gently pulled my hand away. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep living in a house where I was treated like an unwanted guest, where no matter what I did, it was never enough. I had given it my all, and it was still never enough for her. I didn't look back as I left the dining room. Behind me, I could hear my mother-in-law sputtering, trying to process what had just happened. Jem's footsteps followed me, but I didn't stop until I reached our room. I closed the door softly behind me and leaned against it for a moment, closing my eyes. The enormity of what I had just done started to sink in, but instead of regret, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had spent too long bending over backward to keep the peace in that house, but now, I was done. I walked over to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. It was time to go. Jem entered the room just as I was pulling clothes from the closet and folding them neatly into my suitcase. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and panic. "Sherry, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice shaky. I didn't stop packing. "I'm leaving, Jem. I can't live like this anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You don't have to do this. We can figure something out. Talk to her. Make her understand." I looked at him, my heart heavy but resolute. "Jem, we've tried. For a year I've tried to make this work. I've put up with her insults, her passive-aggressive comments, all of it. But nothing's changed. She doesn't want me here, and I can't keep pretending that everything's fine. Jem stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I know my mom's been hard on you, but she doesn't mean it like that. She's just old-fashioned. She told me to leave, Jem, I said quietly. She thinks this house would be better off without me. And maybe she's right. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with desperation. Sherry, don't say that. You're my wife. We're supposed to be a team. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. We are a team, Jem, but I can't keep sacrificing my sanity for this. I need space. I need to figure out who I am again, outside of this house, outside of your mother's constant judgment. He reached for my hand, his voice softening. Where will you go? I paused for a moment, realizing I hadn't actually thought that far ahead. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I'll figure it out, I said finally. I just need to leave. Jem was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he walked over to the dresser and pulled out a pen and a set of papers from the top drawer. My breath caught in my throat when I saw what he was holding. The divorce papers. I had filled them out months ago, in a moment of despair. But I had never given them to him. I hadn't wanted to take that final step. But now, as Jem looked down at the papers in his hands, I realized that maybe this was the only way forward. If this is what you really want, he said quietly, then I'll sign them. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him pick up the pen. His hand trembled slightly as he signed his name at the bottom of the page. When he was done, he set the pen down and looked at me, his eyes filled with sadness. I love you, Sherry, he whispered, but I won't stand in your way. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I love you too, Jem, but I need to do this. I picked up the papers and folded them neatly, placing them in my bag. Jem stood silently by the window, watching as I zipped up my suitcase. As I walked to the door, I paused, glancing back at him one last time. I'll send the papers to the court, I said softly. Take care of yourself. He nodded, his gaze distant, and with that, I walked out of the room, out of the house, and into the unknown. Leaving Jem's family home felt like stepping out of a heavy fog and into the light. The moment I walked through that front door, I felt lighter, freer. But the reality of what I had done weighed on me as I waited for the cab to arrive, clutching my suitcase with trembling hands. I hadn't just left a house. I had left my marriage, my life as I knew it. And now, I had no idea where to go or what to do next. The cab pulled up, and I climbed into the back seat, giving the driver the address of a small hotel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it would give me a place to stay while I figured things out. As the car sped down the darkened streets, I stared out the window, my mind racing. I had no job, no home, no clear plan. All I had was my suitcase and a faint hope that I could start over. When I arrived at the hotel, the receptionist gave me a tired smile and handed me a key to my room. I thanked her quietly and made my way down the dimly lit hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The room was small, but it was clean and quiet. I set my suitcase down on the bed and collapsed onto the mattress, exhaustion washing over me. For the first time in months, I was alone, truly alone. But instead of fear, I felt relief. For the next few days, I stayed in that little hotel room, letting the world outside pass me by. I didn't rush to make any decisions. I didn't try to figure out my next move. I just existed. It was strange, after months of living under the constant scrutiny of my mother-in-law, to suddenly have all this space. But eventually, reality came knocking. I couldn't hide in that hotel room forever. I needed to find a job, a place to live. I needed to build a new life. One morning, as I was scrolling through job listings online, something caught my eye. It was an ad for a freelance video editor. The company was looking for someone with experience in editing promotional videos for online platforms. My heart skipped a beat. Before I had married Jem and moved into his family's home, I had worked as a video editor for an advertising agency. I had loved my job, loved the creativity and the fast pace of the work. But I had given it up to support Jem in his career and to try and make things work with his family. Now, staring at that job listing, I realized I had a chance to go back to what I loved. Without hesitation, I sent in my resume and a portfolio of my previous work. I didn't expect much. I knew how competitive the industry could be. But to my surprise, I received an email a few days later inviting me to interview. The interview was nerve-wracking, but the moment I started talking about my passion for video editing, I felt the old spark return. The interviewer must have seen it too, because at the end of the meeting, he smiled and said, "Welcome aboard." I was hired. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had something to look forward to. I threw myself into my work, swing editing videos for various clients and rediscovering the joy of creating something from nothing. It wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling. And slowly, I started to rebuild my life. As I settled into my new routine, I didn't hear from Jem or his family for several months. Part of me was relieved. I needed the space to figure things out on my own. But another part of me wondered how they were doing, especially Jem. Then, one afternoon, as I was editing a video for a client, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something told me to answer it. "Sherry," a familiar voice said when I picked up the call. It was my mother-in-law. I hadn't spoken to her since the day I left their house. Hearing her voice now, after all this time, sent a chill down my spine. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've been trying to reach you for months," she said, her tone indignant. "Where is Jem? Why hasn't he come home?" I frowned, confused. "Jem? I haven't seen him since I left." She let out a frustrated sigh. "Don't lie to me, Sherry. I know you're behind this. You've turned him against me." "I haven't spoken to Jem in months," I said firmly. "If he hasn't come home, that's between you and him." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "He's really not with you?" "No," I replied. "We're divorced, remember?" She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, more vulnerable. "I don't know where he is. He won't answer my calls. I'm worried about him." For the first time, I heard something in her voice that I hadn't expected. Fear. Fear that she had lost Jem for good. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, not sure what else to say. She sighed again, the weight of her regret palpable even through the phone. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Sherry, but I wish things had been different." I didn't know how to respond to that. The years of hurt and resentment couldn't be undone with a single phone call. But as I listened to the sadness in her voice, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we were both victims of our circumstances. "I hope you find him," I said finally, and then, before she could say anything else, I hung up. That phone call marked a turning point for me. It reminded me that while I had moved on from the past, there were still pieces of my old life that lingered, unresolved. But instead of feeling burdened by it, I felt a sense of closure. I had done what I needed to do. I had reclaimed my life, my career, my sense of self. And now, I was ready to embrace whatever came next. As the months passed, I continued to grow in my career, taking on bigger projects and building a name for myself in the industry. I moved out of the hotel and into a small apartment of my own, a space that felt entirely mine. And then, one day, I received an unexpected email. It was from Jem. "I hope you're doing well," his message began. "I just wanted to let you know that I've moved out of my parents' house. I'm living on my own now, and I've started working as a freelance photographer." He went on to explain that he had needed time to figure things out just like I had. He apologized for the way things had ended between us and wished me all the best. As I read his words, I felt a sense of peace. Our chapter together had ended, but we were both moving forward in our own ways, and that was enough. Looking back on everything, I realized that the struggles I had faced had made me stronger. Leaving Jem's family had been one of the hardest decisions of my life, but it had also been the most important. I had rediscovered my passion for video editing, rebuilt my career from the ground up, and created a life that was entirely my own. And now, as I stood at the threshold of a new chapter, I felt more confident and capable than ever before. The future was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid of it. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready.